Okay, so we had a ton of questions after last week's premiere episode of Picard, and this week's got a lot to live up to, so let's take a look. So as always, I'm Al, this is the Geek in Review. We're going to be talking about Picard Season 2, Episode 2, Penance, so if you haven't seen it, it's all going to be spoilers. So yeah, what was going on last week? Why did the Borg show up then? Is this the darkest timeline, and what's going on with Q? So the episode kind of picks up straight away. We open on Earth and it doesn't look great. The planet's covered in a grids and some sort of security net and the sirens blaring everywhere. And there's a bit of back and forth between Q and Picard, and yeah, it's the kind of usual stuff, but it's nice to see it after all these years. Although one thing happens, and it happens a couple of times in this episode, where Q sort of breaks the fourth wall. He says the phrase "yesterday's Enterprise", and then he does it again when he says "through a mirror darkly", which is the name of an Enterprise episode as well. So yeah, that did take me out of the episode a little bit, and I did think it was kind of letting the writing down. I mean, what was the kind of reason for dropping that in other than just to create an Easter egg? But Q tells Picard this is a world of his making and that he's the board that the game's getting played on. So what exactly does that mean? Now, Picard mentioned some ancestors in the last episode, and I'm not fully sold on this, but I think when they go back to 2024, it'll be one of Picard's relatives that's going to be involved in this somehow. I do have another theory, and I'll get to that in a second. But yeah, why is Q showing up now? Because apart from the first time and the last time that we see him in the Next Generation and the whole Borg thing, he doesn't usually put people in danger. And Picard senses that Q isn't himself and that he isn't well, so the immortal being seems to be on his way out. So what is up with the Borg Collective and the Q Continuum now? Are these two linked? Is it linked between Guinan and Q? We know that there's something there, but it's never been explained, and if it is going to be explained, Picard Season 2 or 3 is the real last chance to do it, and I think that's worth keeping in mind. But yeah, this Earth does seem a bit bleak. It seems that it's drained all its resources, and Picard doesn't really have as much a vineyard as he does a plantation. There's still Romulans working there, but they're clearly slaves. And Q does the whole wonderful life routine, and it turns out that Picard's a bit of a butcher. You know, he's killed Gul Dukat, he's killed Sarek, he's killed every famous person that you know. And it's the Confederation of Earth and Confederation of Planets, so yeah, man, they are going really hard with this alt-right thing, which I think is very interesting, is going to be a sensitive topic point for some people in the Star Trek community, but I enjoyed it. Like, we have to see our own sort of dark past dredged up, and we can't ignore history at the end of the day. So it's not the mirrorverse that Q mentioned earlier on in the episode that we've seen before in Star Trek. And Q is dying, and Picard has died, and Guinan's aging, so what is going on here? But Q tells him that this is his penance and that he has to atone, but we're not told what for, and Q says that he's going to give him help. And yeah, it is definitely a whole wonderful life routine, because the synth butler that we met last week is called Harvey, so if you've seen the film, you'll get that. And the writing in this episode is a little bit heavy-handed for me. It's literally on an alt-right history, so, you know, make of that what you will. Picard's found out he's an intergalactic Genghis Khan, or maybe even just a more successful Khan. And he learns a little bit about his history in this timeline, and it's a CSS World Eraser, not the Enterprise, the ship that we're seeing in the painting that's been debated about for a few months. And yeah, the Confederation are basically the British Empire in the 17th century, so they're not the greatest bunch of guys to be around. It's a very human-centric world or universe. Although he does get his old conference chair back, so I thought that was nice. Picard doesn't really seem to be bothered about being stuck here, and he wants to find out where Laris is and not Guinan first. That didn't really make sense to me. And this Picard in this timeline seems to be a lot of a bigger deal than the one at home. He goes to a ceremony called Eradication Day, and I'll get to that in a minute, but he runs into and rescues Raffi and Eleanor. Now, as for the rest of the gang, Seven, or Annika Hansen, wakes up in what, quite honestly, is a pretty tasteless apartment, and she's married with no Borgy bits. One thing that bothers me about this is when Q says, "I'll give you help." You would naturally think that Q would rope in Riker, Worf, Geordi, those kind of guys that he's known for decades, rather than people that he's never met that Picard just happened to be with at the moment that he was going to die. Or die again, I suppose, for the second time. So this kind of bugs me. In the whole episode I kept thinking, it'd be nice to see Riker and Worf and Geordi having to hook up in this alternative timeline after maybe years of not seeing each other in the main timeline, and how they would work out their differences and the characters would develop. And for me, that'd be a better story, but that's not what we've got. So anyway, Seven is basically president of the Confederation because of writing. And what's harder to believe is not that she's the president, is that how did the guy that plays her husband land her? And we get a lot of exposition going on. There isn't peace on Earth. This isn't the Federation that we're used to. In fact, conflict seems to be rampant everywhere. We get a name drop of General Sisko, and Seven seeks out Rios, who's also a colonel, so the ranking structure is a bit more militaristic in this universe, but you didn't think it was going to not be. And Rios still has the last Serena and wakes up mid-battle because it's a bad universe, and he's fighting Vulcans, and for some reason he's the only person on board the ship during the battle, which, yeah, it was a little bit weird. So Seven manages to reach him and call him back. Now, Raffi and Eleanor are the weirdest ones for me. As I mentioned, Picard rescues them later on, but Eleanor's involved in the rebellion and Raffi's basically some sort of cop, and she instantly seems to understand what's going on enough when she arrives to save Eleanor pretty much instantaneously. And we didn't have any rampant murder last week, but we do get quite a lot in this episode, so don't worry about that. Agnes wakes up and she's basically doing the evil version of what she'd done in the Prime universe, but she was pretty evil there anyway. I mean, can Agnes be any worse in the darkest timeline? And she figures out as well what's going on straight away, and Seven manages to hook up with her pretty quick as part of the ceremony, which is eradicating the Borg Queen. Well, part of one. And I couldn't help but wonder is, what if they just had the bottom half of the Borg Queen and not the top? Would that be any use? And this is a totally different Queen to the one that we've seen before, and I don't just mean the actress. She's a lot more animated, and she recognises Seven as Seven and Agnes as well. Agnes, and that they shouldn't be there. So she's sort of like a mystical prophet so far. She knows that the timeline's been broken, and maybe this got me thinking, and this is a theory, that's why Q said you don't mess with the Borg when he was in that episode of Star Trek Voyager with his son. That's something to think about. So the gang all hook up and they work out what's going on, but Q's changed the past. But why? What has he got from this, or what is he hoping to gain from this? We know that he's not doing so well. So Picard goes to the Queen and she recognises him as well as Locutus, but not Locutus. And for 1 minute, it occurred to me, why isn't Picard asking her about what happened on the bridge on the Stargazer? Because writing, man. Now, the change happened in early in 2024, and the Queen tells him that there's somewhere there to help when he goes back, a watcher. So this is playing into my 17th century Guinan theory that after Time's Arrow in the Next Generation, she didn't leave Earth, so she's just been on there, or she's just been on Earth since that adventure in the Next Generation, which would make total sense. Again, they live for 1,000 years, so a couple hundred or 250 would seem a blink of an eye to her. So yeah, I think Guinan is still on Earth from when we've seen her in the TNG flashback, or the TNG episode that was set in the past, sorry. Means that she's going to play a larger role than we've seen in the trailers as well, which I think, if I'm honest, is pretty exciting. So Picard works out how to do the whole Kirk time travel thing. Seven makes a deal with the Queen, and there's kind of this weird look between them that maybe Seven might be the Borg Queen from last week. I'm not too sure about that. And we also get a few glimpses of Adam Sung in a hologram form, and we hear his voice as well. So that's who Brett Spiner's most likely playing. Does that mean that Adam Sung is a sort of alt-right guy in 2024? I kind of hope so, because it'll be interesting to see Brett Spiner play that. because all the scenes are kind of generic, and this might add a little bit of a flavour to one, even if though it's unpalatable overall. But Brett Spiner's a great actor, and I honestly think he could pull it off. But still, I'm going to stick to my other theory that what's happened here is that first contact between Vulcans and humans has happened sooner, before humanity is ready, and this is the result. So this would tie into the First Contact movie, which, you know, was about the Borg and First Contact. So anyway, Picard has to execute the Queen because he's the Borg conqueror, obviously. And we get the same setup from the Academy, but darker, and it works really well. But they manage to escape to the Queen and connect her to the last arena, but somehow 79's husband beams on board and captures them. So we don't get the big time travel scene with the ships yet. But overall, this was a pretty good ep, not as great as the first. I don't think the writing was as tight, and it seems as if they're drifting into some bad habits from season 1. And again, I couldn't stop thinking that what would happen if this whole crew, or the whole setup, was some of the Next Generation cast that hadn't seen each other in years, rather than just these random characters that were only connected over the last season. And Eleanor had really nothing to do in this episode, and if anything, Agnes had too much to do, especially when it comes to dialogue. But Eleanor got back into the murdering spree, so I suppose if that's your thing, that's something. But let me know what you think of Star Trek Picard. I'm still really enjoying this show. I'm going to drop the Star Trek Discovery episode for this week later on today as well. So if you made it this far, please leave a like on the video and subscribe to make sure you don't miss anything, and thanks for watching.